Republican lawmakers in Texas now launching a second effort to pass sweeping voting restrictions at a special session called by the governor. Texas Democrats blocked Republicans' first attempt in May by staging that dramatic walkout. The Republicans there did concede two of the most controversial provisions this time around: limits to early Sunday voting hours and language that would make it easier for courts to overturn election results, measures that making casting mail-in ballots harder, banning drive-through voting centers, empowering partisan poll watchers, all still in the proposal they're talking about in the special session. Joining us now, attorney and contributing columnist at the Washington Post, George Conway.
Hi.
Nice to see you here.
Thanks.
What's going on in Texas? Inevitable. The Governor Abbott was going to call this special session to push this through. The courts in Georgia and other places have sort of said, we're not going to touch this right now. I mean, will we see this march through the country?
I think that's what we are seeing. We are seeing that lots of states are doing this. It's unclear to me, at least, to what extent this will have a negative effect on voting. Some of the provisions are bad. Some of the provisions are so-so. The things that concern me, though, are the provisions that try to restrict or place limitations or change how votes are counted and how votes are tabulated, and the rules about challenging the results, because that to me is where the rubber hits the road. I think that at the end of the day, people who want to vote are going to vote, but the provisions that are designed to overturn, potentially, you have partisan officials overturning election results, are the ones that are most disturbing to me. And it's hard to gauge because you have to know the exact structure of each state's voting rules and election commissions. But it just strikes me that none of that can be good.
George, I wanted to get your take on a fascinating vignette from a new book out by Michael Bender at the Wall Street Journal. It talks about this encounter between then President Trump and then Vice President Mike Pence. And it says this was actually something that happened after Pence's political committee had hired Corey Lewandowski, who is the president's advisor. And he writes this: he, meaning Trump, crumpled the article and threw it at his vice president. So disloyal, Mr. Trump said. Mr. Pence lost it. Mr. Pence picked up the article and threw it back at Mr. Trump. He leaned forward, toward the president, and pointed a finger a few inches from his chest. We walked you through every detail of this, Mr. Pence snarled. We did this for you as a favor, and this is how you respond. You need to get your facts straight. I just wonder what you think about this, because obviously this challenges the very public face that Pence put on, where he was so complimentary and so differential to Trump.
Well, I think the moral of the story is some people, you can only take so much, even Mike Pence. I can only say, though, that I wish that we had seen a little more of that Mike Pence publicly and not heard it, after everything was over, when people are trying to rehabilitate their reputations. I mean, the fact of the matter is there should have been more pushback on the president and more pushback publicly on the president when President Trump, when he did outrageous things. And I just wish we had seen more of that from Mike Pence.
The book also suggests that after the election, the former president wanted to replace Bill Barr as Attorney General with John Ratcliffe. What do you think of that?
What I find most interesting about that is Ratcliffe had the smarts not to take the job. And, again, it just shows you that you can never please the man. I mean, Bill Barr did so much to humor Donald Trump, and yet it wasn't enough. I mean, it wasn't enough because as it's described in, I think, Jonathan Karl's excerpt, which covers some of the same material, it wasn't enough for Trump because Barr didn't, at the end of the day, engage in litigation on behalf of the fake election fraud claims. He didn't indict Hunter Biden. He didn't issue the Durham report. He didn't indict Jim Comey. Nothing was ever enough for Donald Trump. And the reason why it got so out of hand was, people didn't push back at the interim steps. They acceded to some of his desires and wishes in certain ways, and Barr was one of the biggest people humoring Trump, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, and that's what happened. And That's why I said just a moment ago, I wish that Mike Pence had pushed back a little more. But then again, he wouldn't be renominated in 2020, and that's the risk he was pushing. And with Barr, he runs the risk of being fired. And that was sort of the moral of the story, in a lot of ways, about the Trump administration, is that people were more concerned about their jobs than about principle, and about pushing back on the president, and about doing the right thing. And that's one of the reasons why we are where we are today.
So I wonder what you think about Mike Pompeo's portrayal here, because he certainly would fit into that category here. This book reveals that he warned colleagues, quote, "The crazies have taken over," as Trump's fraud conspiracy theories were growing after the election.
That's really nice that he thought that, and that he said that privately. Why didn't he go onto Fox and say that? Why? And we're all hearing it now. Oh, the crazies were there. There was nobody there to push back. It's terrible. Look at it's Rudy Giuliani's fault. Well, you could have said something at the time, all these folks. Well, and they didn't. And that's the most outrageous thing about it.
And it's
they knew better. We're just going to say privately, "Though you lost the election." Shh. And when they didn't do it publicly, they needed to do it publicly. At least, you can give Barr some credit, and McConnell, who put Barr up to it, give him some credit for saying we didn't see enough fraud. But that was basically the extent of it. Everybody else just kept their mouth shut. Oh, it'll just run its course. Sooner or later, he'll accept the results. No, he won't. That's not who he is.
Do you think we'll ever get answers, George? Here, I imagine it will take years, but do you think that we will ever get answers from people who are in these positions to do this, and will reflect on this years from now in a historical way and answer that question? Why didn't you stand up?
I'd like to hear that. I really would. Yeah. I'd like to hear that, because a lot of people knew better.
But look, it's lingering. It's the same thing. It's connected to where we are today.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the same connection to Republicans in office who are afraid of losing their jobs.
Right. And it goes to the same reason why you see just minor pushback against Marjorie Taylor Greene, as was reported in the last hour. They say, "Oh, could you do this little show on TV just to make up for it?" And they don't punish her for saying outrageous things. And yet, on the other hand, you've got Liz Cheney, who loses her leadership position because she simply told the truth. It's the same thing. People are not willing to basically tell, not just Trump, but the Republican base generally, that, here's the truth, and we have to accept that truth, and we have to accept the truth that Donald Trump lost. We have to accept, and here are the reasons why. It's not, it's not brown shirt tactics to make people, or to urge people to take the vaccine that, Donald Trump brags about having created. Right? Doesn't even make any sense. And yet there's not that pushback. There's not that leadership, because people are more concerned about their individual political careers, McCarthy becoming speaker, than they are about doing the right thing for their own constituents and for their own party. And it's self-destructive. It's the reason why they lost the presidency and the House and the Senate. And it's not going to get them anywhere good in the future.
It's not going to change anytime soon, though. That is so clear.
That's true.
George, if you could stick around for us for just a moment. Coming up, what could be the real reason for former President Trump suing Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube?
Plus, did Trump and his allies try to meddle with the 2020 election in Arizona? And a 12-time Olympic medalist tells us this week, former President Trump announced he is suing Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube for suspending him from their platforms. It's clearly a fundraising ploy, because they sent out fundraising messages the minute the lawsuit was filed. Most legal experts say this is questionable as well. Now, Trump is defending the legal action in a new op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. He writes, "One of the gravest threats to our democracy today is a powerful group of big tech corporations that have teamed up with government to censor the free speech of the American people. This is not only wrong, it is unconstitutional." George Conway is back with us. George, you said this lawsuit was as stupid as you think it is. What do you mean by that?
It is every bit, and when you actually read the complaint, it is every bit as illogical and irrational as you would think it would be, because the essential thrust of the claim is that these social media companies are violating the First Amendment by deplatforming Trump. And the First Amendment doesn't apply to these social media companies. In other words, you don't have a right against these companies the way you have the right against the government not to have them cut you off. And for example, I mean, here, CNN, if I say something that somebody doesn't like and they say he's a terrible guest, it's CNN's First Amendment right to take me off the air because CNN is not the government. If the government said, no, you can't have Conway on the air, that would violate the First Amendment. And there's a doctrine that distinguishes between public actors and private actors on that. It's called the state action doctrine, and it's a very important doctrine, particularly with regard to the First Amendment. And it says that the only way that a private actor can be treated like the governmental actor is that if they're performing an exclusive and traditional government function, if the action by the private entity is coerced, or if they're acting in cahoots jointly with the government. None of that happened here. And the allegations are essentially particularly ridiculous because in claiming that Twitter and Facebook were acting as the government on January 6 or January 7, whenever it was when Trump was deplatformed, acting as the United States government and coerced by the United States government and acting jointly with the United States government, guess who was president of the United States? Donald Trump. The story just makes no sense in any number of levels. It's not going to last very long in court. The defendant should make a motion to dismiss, maybe even a motion for monetary sanctions for having to defend such a frivolous lawsuit, and it will get dismissed very quickly.
Constitutionally, we all have the freedom to say what we want to say, but you don't have that freedom actually right now if you are in politics in general, but especially in the Republican Party. We're seeing that when you look at this Ohio Senate race, candidate J.D. Vance has apologized, George, because he criticized Trump as reprehensible in tweets that he has now deleted. What do you think about this?
I think it's absurd. He deserved credit for, he did more than I did. I actually supported Trump. He didn't because he saw bad things in Trump. And I don't know how, after watching Trump, even after 1 or 1.5 or 2 years, you could conclude that, oh, he was better than I thought he would be. He was worse than everybody thought he would be. He was worse than J.D. Vance thought he was going to be. And this is all about political ambition. Because today, the litmus test for being a Republican is not whether you're for less regulation. It's not whether you're for a free market economy. It's not whether you're for the Constitution and so on. It's about whether you have fealty to Donald Trump. And that's just an ongoing problem with the Republican Party. And it seems to be just getting worse, notwithstanding the fact that he has been removed from office and he's been deplatformed. It's just getting worse. And I think it's on the edges of the Republican Party, it's going to cause Republicans to bleed more support and lose more elections like they did in Georgia, where people were convinced that their votes didn't matter because the president was saying that the elections were fraudulent. And it's just going to get worse for the Republicans, and it's a downward spiral, and it's very sad.
It's a test, but there's certainly only one answer there. George, it's great to have you with us this morning. George Conway, thank you.
Thanks.